She used her last strength. They called her the Hollow One. A wolfless girl in a world that measured worth by the sharpness of your fangs. For 19 years, Elara Voss endured the cruelties of the Ashwood Pack. The burns, the starvation, the cage they locked her in during full moons so they could laugh at her silence while the rest of them howled. But on the night she dragged her broken body through a frozen forest to shield a dying wolf cub from a poacher's trap, she didn't know 3 things. That the cub was the Alpha King's firstborn son, that her blood was soaking into sacred ground, or that the most powerful wolf alive was already running toward the scent of her sacrifice. The cage smelled like rust and old fear. Elara pressed her spine against the bars, feeling each corroded ridge bite through the thin fabric of her shift. Outside, the Ashwood Pack compound pulsed with the frenzy of the full moon, bodies twisting, bones cracking, voices dissolving into howls that shook the winter air like thunder. She could hear everything. The wet snap of a shoulder dislocating, the guttural moan of muscle reshaping itself around new architecture, the joyous, agonized song of wolves being born from human skin. She heard it all and felt nothing inside her answer. Still empty, little hollow. Beta Marcus leaned against the shed door, arms crossed, his shift half complete. His jaw was too long, his teeth already canine. Firelight from the bonfire outside carved his face into something cruel and ancient. 19 years old, and not even a flicker. Your mother was the same, defective stock. At least she had the decency to die young. Elara said nothing. She had learned, years ago, that silence was a kind of armor. Not strong armor. Not the kind that stopped the bruises Alpha Roderick left on her ribs when he found her useless. Not the kind that prevented the Pack's children from throwing stones at her during training drills she was never allowed to join. But silence kept her breathing. And breathing, she had decided, was enough. Marcus spat through the bars. The saliva landed on the small wool blanket she'd been clutching, the only possession she had. It was gray, threadbare, burned at one corner from the night Roderick's mate, Luna Celeste, had held it over a candle flame while Elara begged. The blanket had been her mother's. Now it smelled of smoke and spit and the specific loneliness of things that have been loved too hard by someone with nothing else. Alpha wants you cleaning the kill room after the hunt tonight, Marcus said. Every surface, bare hands. You bleed, you keep working. He left. The shed door banged shut, and the padlock clicked with the finality of a full stop. Elara exhaled. She pressed her face into the blanket, inhaling past the damage to find the ghost scent underneath. Lavender and wood smoke and something warm she could never name. Her mother's scent, fading more each year, like a voice growing quieter at the far end of a long hallway. The moon rose higher. Through a gap in the shed's warped planks, she could see it, swollen and white, impossibly close, as if it had bent down to study her. She'd read once, in a book she'd stolen from the Pack library and returned before anyone noticed, that the moon was the wolves' first mother, that she'd breathed life into human bodies and given them a second shape as a gift. If that was true, Elara thought, then the moon mother had looked at her and decided she wasn't worth a breath. She tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled, long and bright and aching with aliveness. The sound carved through her chest like a blade, not because it was cruel, but because it was beautiful. And because beauty, when you cannot touch it, is the cruelest thing there is. At midnight, they released her for the kill room. Elara walked barefoot through the snow, her feet blue and stinging, past the celebration fires where the pack danced in their pelts. No one looked at her. She was furniture. She was weather. She was the silence between their songs, and they had long ago stopped noticing silence. The kill room was red from floor to ceiling. Deer carcasses hung from hooks, steam still rising from their open bellies. The smell was so thick it had texture, copper and meat, and the wild, feral sweetness of fresh death. Elara picked up the brush and began to scrub. Her hands split open within the first hour. She kept working. The blood from the deer mingled with the blood from her knuckles, and she could no longer tell which was hers. She found the cub at the edge of the world. That was how it felt, at least. The place where the Ashwood Pack's territory ended and the Blackwood forest began. A border marked not by fences, but by instinct. The trees beyond it were older, taller, their trunks wrapped in moss that seemed to breathe. No Ashwood wolf crossed the line willingly. The forest belonged to the crown, to the Alpha King's domain, and trespassing meant death. But Elara was not a wolf. And on that freezing February night, stumbling through the snow on an errand to gather firewood that Celeste had demanded at an impossible hour, she heard something that overrode every territorial instinct her pack had tried to beat into her. A cry, high and thin and desperate. Not human, not fully animal. The sound a young shifter makes when they are trapped between forms and terrified. She followed the sound without thinking. Later, she would not be able to explain why. She only knew that the cry had reached inside her chest and closed a fist around something she thought had been dead, and that she was running before she made the decision to run. The trap was old, iron-jawed and savage, the kind poachers set for wild wolves, not knowing or not caring that shifter cubs sometimes wandered in their pelts. It had clamped shut around the left foreleg of a small wolf, barely 6 months old. The cub's fur was black with silver at the tips, and its eyes, amber, wide, glazed with shock, caught the moonlight and held it like twin lanterns. Blood pooled beneath the paw. The iron teeth had bitten deep. "Shh," Elara whispered, dropping to her knees. The snow soaked through her skirt instantly, but she barely felt it. "Shh, little one. I'm here. I'm here." The cub snarled, a pitiful, brave sound, all baby teeth and bravado. Elara didn't flinch. She'd been bitten by worse. She'd been bitten by the world every day for 19 years, and she was still here. And so she reached for the trap with steady hands and began to pry. The iron resisted. Rust had welded the mechanism into something almost alive in its stubbornness. Elara's fingers scraped raw, then bled, then went numb. She repositioned her grip, pressing her palms flat against the jagged teeth, and pushed with everything she had. Something in her shoulder popped. She ignored it. The cub whimpered, and the sound was a needle through her sternum. "Almost," she breathed. "Almost, almost." The trap opened with a shriek of metal. The cub pulled its leg free and collapsed against her chest, shaking violently, its small heart a drumbeat she could feel against her own ribs. Elara wrapped her mother's blanket around the tiny body and held it close, rocking gently, murmuring nonsense words that she realized, with a distant surprise, were the same words her mother had whispered to her before the sickness took her voice. That was when she felt the warmth spreading down her side. She looked down. The trap hadn't just caught the cub. When she'd pried it open, the iron jaw had sprung back and bitten into her abdomen, a deep, ragged gash that was now pulsing red through her shift. The forest tilted. Stars rearranged themselves. Elara pressed the cub tighter to her chest and pulled the blanket around them both. She thought about standing, about walking back, about the kill room she had not finished cleaning and the punishment that awaited. But her legs had become rumors. The snow beneath her was warm now, which she knew, from some distant, fading part of her mind, was a very bad sign. "It's okay," she told the cub. "You're safe now." The cub licked the blood from her collarbone. She closed her eyes. The last thing she heard before the darkness came was a howl, not from the Ashwood compound, but from deep within the Blackwood forest. It was massive and old and full of a fury so vast it made the trees shake. It was the sound of a king who had just realized his child was missing, and it was coming closer. Alpha King Caelan Blackwood had not felt fear in 17 years. He had felt rage, the seismic, bone-deep kind that turned his eyes black and made lesser wolves drop to their bellies in submission. He had felt grief, briefly, when his Luna died, bringing their son into the world. He had felt the cold satisfaction of ruling the largest territory in the northern packs, the weight of a crown that was not literal, but was carved into the way every wolf within 500 miles lowered their gaze when he entered a room. But fear was a currency he'd spent long ago. Until tonight, until Ronan's scent vanished from the nursery, replaced by the sharp ammonia tang of a stranger's trail leading into the southern woods. Caelan shifted before he hit the front door. The change was violent and instantaneous. No gradual cracking, no slow reshaping. One heartbeat, he was a man, 6'4" and corded with muscle. The next, he was a wolf the color of midnight, 260 pounds of predatory precision, already running. His beta, Soren, flanked him. 3 trackers followed. But Caelan outran them all because his son's fear was a scent trail as vivid as fire, and he would tear apart the earth itself to follow it. They crossed the border into no man's land, the strip between Blackwood territory and the Ashwood Pack's compound. The smell changed here. Ashwood wolves reeked of aggression and neglect, their territory poorly maintained, the land sour with bad leadership. Caelan's lip curled. Then he smelled the blood. Not Ronan's alone. There was another's mixed in. Human adjacent, but wrong somehow. Flat where it should have been bright, as if the wolf's scent had been stripped out and only the shadow remained. And beneath the blood, something that made Caelan stumble mid-stride. Lavender. Wood smoke. And a sweetness so acute it triggered the bond recognition center at the base of his skull. He burst through the tree line and stopped. She was sitting in the snow with her back against a fallen oak. She was small, dangerously thin, her collarbones like wings beneath translucent skin. Her dark hair was matted with ice. Her bare feet were blue, and she was holding his son against her chest, wrapped in a singed gray blanket, her arms locked around the cub's trembling body with a fierceness that contradicted every fragile thing about her. Blood was everywhere. Hers, pooling beneath her, soaking the snow, steaming faintly in the frozen air. A sprung poacher's trap lay beside her, its teeth streaked red. She had opened it with her bare hands. Ronan was alive. Hurt, but alive. His small head was tucked under her chin, and he was whimpering softly, not in pain, but in the particular distress of a cub who has found safety and is afraid to lose it. Caelan shifted back to human form. He barely noticed the cold. He could not stop staring at the girl's face, the bruises layered on bruises, the burn marks on her wrists, the way her lips moved silently, as if she were still soothing the cub, even as consciousness left her. "Soren," he said. His voice was quiet, which was how his people knew he was most dangerous. "The girl." Soren crouched beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her throat. "Pulse is there. Barely. She's lost a lot of blood, and she's hypothermic." "Caelan." He hesitated. "She's wolfless. I can't sense a wolf in her at all. I don't care if she's made of glass. She saved my son. Get her to the healers, now." Soren lifted her carefully. Ronan yelped when she was pulled away, thrashing in the tracker's arms, reaching back toward the unconscious girl with his small, injured paw. The gray blanket fell into the blood-stained snow. Caelan picked it up. He held it for a moment, feeling the threadbare wool between his fingers. It smelled of her. Lavender and smoke and something fiercely, impossibly alive, despite everything that had been done to break it. He folded the blanket carefully and carried it with him as they ran for the Blackwood healers. Behind him, the moon stared down at the blood-soaked snow and said nothing, because some prayers are answered in silence. Elara woke to warmth and did not trust it. Warmth, in her experience, was a lure, a fire that would be snatched away, a meal offered and then knocked from her hands. So when she opened her eyes to find herself in a bed, an actual bed, with sheets that smelled of cedar and a quilt heavy with down, her first instinct was to calculate the punishment this kindness would cost. The room was large and made of stone. Firelight moved across the walls like living things. Herbs hung from the ceiling in neat bundles. Wolfsbane, chamomile, yarrow, things she recognized from her stolen reading. A woman sat in a chair beside the bed, her silver hair braided over one shoulder, her eyes the pale green of shallow water. She radiated an authority that was different from the alphas Elara had known. This was not dominance. This was competence. "Don't try to sit up," the woman said. "You lost nearly 1/3 of your blood volume. The wound on your abdomen required 27 stitches and a regenerative compress. You also have 2 cracked ribs that are older than tonight, a dislocated shoulder that has been relocated, and..." She paused, and something dangerous moved behind her calm eyes. "Burns on your wrists and back. Some months old, some years." Elara said nothing. "My name is Helene. I'm the chief healer of the Blackwood Pack." She let that settle. "You are in the Alpha King's compound. You are safe." Safe. The word was a foreign language. "The cub." Elara's voice cracked. It had been so long since she'd used it for anything other than obedience. "Prince Ronan is recovering beautifully thanks to you. His leg required splinting, but young shifters heal fast." Helene leaned forward. "He hasn't stopped crying since they separated you. He's in the next room, and every time someone opens the door, he lunges for it. He wants you." Elara blinked. "Why?" "Because you saved his life. Because you wrapped him in your blanket and held him while you bled out. Pups imprint on the scent of safety. And right now, for him, safety smells like lavender and courage." Before Elara could respond, the door opened. A man entered, and the room contracted around him. She had never seen Caelan Blackwood, but she didn't need an introduction. His presence announced itself in the way the air thickened, the way the fire seemed to lean toward him, the way every instinct she possessed, wolfless or not, screamed in recognition of something ancient and enormous. He was tall, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a storm front. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and it did not make him less beautiful. It made him a warning. He was carrying her blanket. He'd folded it with care. "You're awake," he said. Not a question. His voice was deep and carried the particular weight of a man who was unused to being uncertain and did not enjoy the experience. Yes, Alpha. The title came automatically, and she hated herself for the way she lowered her gaze, the way her shoulders curved inward. Roderick's training. She was a dog performing tricks for a master, and the shame of it burned worse than any brand. Something shifted in Caelan's expression. She didn't see it because she wasn't looking, but Helene did, and the healer quietly excused herself. "Look at me," he said. "Not an alpha command, a request." She raised her eyes. They were dark brown, nearly black, and full of a wary exhaustion that he recognized, not from his own life, which had been forged in power, but from the eyes of wolves he had liberated from rogue packs, survivors, the ones who flinched at kindness because kindness had always been a trap. "Tell me your name." "Elara Voss, Ashwood Pack. Tell me who hurt you." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "Everyone." Caelan set the folded blanket on the edge of her bed, gently as if it were made of glass. "I'm going to ask you questions. You don't have to answer any of them. But I want you to know that whatever you tell me, nothing will happen to you. Not here. Not in my territory. Do you understand?" She didn't understand. Not really. But she nodded, because he was the first person in 19 years to ask her a question and wait for the answer. Alpha Roderick of Ashwood had always known that one day his cruelty would reach a ceiling. He had not expected that ceiling to arrive in the form of the Alpha King standing in his great hall, radiating the kind of fury that made the stone walls weep condensation. Caelan had come with 12 of his royal guard. Unnecessary, since his presence alone was enough to make every wolf in the Ashwood compound submit. But he brought them because he wanted Roderick to understand the scale of his miscalculation. "You kept a wolfless girl in a cage," Caelan said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The Alpha command threaded through his words like iron through silk, and every wolf in the hall felt their knees soften. "You starved her, burned her, used her as unpaid labor in conditions that would violate every pack law written in the last 300 years. Roderick stood behind his dining table, as if it were a barricade. His face was the color of wet clay. "She's wolfless, Your Majesty. She has no standing under pack law. She is a person." Caelan's eyes went black. Not the amber to black of a standard alpha shift, but a total eclipse, the kind that happened only to kings, only when the wolf and the man were in such perfect, furious agreement that they became a single entity. "She is a member of your pack, which means she was under your protection, which means every scar on her body is a treaty you wrote with your own cowardice." Celeste stepped forward, her chin lifted, her Luna's authority like a costume she'd put on for the occasion. "That girl was a burden on our resources. We gave her shelter and food. You gave her a cage and table scraps," Soren interrupted from beside Caelan. "Our healers documented everything. Malnutrition spanning years. Fractures that healed without being set. Burn patterns consistent with deliberate application of heated metal." His voice was clinical, which made the content more devastating. "She has the body of a war refugee." Caelan reached into his coat and withdrew a scroll sealed with the black wax of the crown. "Ashwood Pack is hereby placed under royal review. Your title as Alpha is suspended pending investigation. Beta Marcus will be held for questioning regarding his direct role in the abuse of a civilian pack member." "You can't." Roderick's wolf surged, his eyes flashing amber. Caelan smiled. It was the worst thing any of them had ever seen. "Challenge me, Roderick. Please. I haven't killed anyone in months, and my wolf is feeling neglected." The room held its breath. Every Ashwood wolf could feel the pressure of Caelan's dominance like a hand pressing them into the earth. Some had already dropped to their knees. Marcus was on all fours, panting, unable to meet the king's gaze. Roderick did not challenge. He lowered his eyes, and in that single gesture, the illusion of his power collapsed like a sandcastle at high tide. Caelan turned to address the pack. "Any wolf who participated in or witnessed the mistreatment of Elara Voss and failed to intervene will be investigated. Any wolf who can provide testimony will be granted crown protection." He paused. "She is now under my personal guardianship. Touch her, and you declare war on the Blackwood crown." He left without looking back. The scroll remained on the table, unrolled, its contents visible to every wolf in the hall. A list of charges that read like a horror novel, and a sentence that would remake the political landscape of the northern packs. In the car back to Blackwood territory, Soren glanced at his alpha. "You're going to dissolve the pack. I'm going to give them the chance to prove they deserve to exist. If they can't..." Caelan stared out the window at the passing forest. "Then yes." "And the girl?" Caelan was quiet for a long time. He was thinking about her eyes, about the way she'd said "everyone," as if it were simply a weather report, not dramatic, not seeking pity, just a statement of atmospheric conditions in the world she'd been given. "The girl stays," he said, "for as long as she wants. Forever, if that's what it takes." Healing was not a straight line. Elara learned this in the weeks that followed, in the stuttering 2 steps forward, 1 step back rhythm of a body and mind, trying to remember what it felt like to be treated as human. The Blackwood compound was nothing like Ashwood. Where Roderick's territory had been cramped and hostile, a compound built on intimidation, every structure designed to remind you of hierarchy, the Blackwood grounds felt almost organic. Stone buildings grew out of the hillside as if the forest had decided to build them. Gardens wound between residences. A massive training field bordered the eastern woods, and the sounds that drifted from it were not screams, but laughter and grunting, and the companionable trash talk of wolves who fought for skill rather than dominance. Elara was given a room in the healer's wing. It had a window that overlooked a meadow. The first morning she woke there, she stared at the view for 11 minutes before she believed it was real. She counted. 11 minutes of standing at the glass, waiting for the walls to close in, or the door to lock, or the punishment to begin. Nothing happened. Sunlight moved across the floor like a slow, golden animal, and nobody came to take it away. Ronan was the one who taught her how to stay. The cub had recovered quickly. Young shifters healed with an almost offensive efficiency, and had taken to following Elara everywhere. He would pad into her room in his wolf form, his splinted leg barely slowing him, and press his small body against her ankles until she picked him up. In human form, he was a chubby 6-month-old with his father's dark hair and his mother's amber eyes, and he communicated primarily through grabbing fistfuls of Elara's hair and refusing to let go. He's never bonded with anyone like this. Helene told her one afternoon, watching the cub sleep in Elara's arms. Since his mother died, he's been guarded. The nannies tried everything. He wouldn't let anyone hold him for more than a few minutes. She shook her head. And then you showed up bleeding and half dead, and he decided you were his. Elara looked down at Ronan's sleeping face. His tiny fingers were curled around the edge of her mother's blanket, which she had washed and mended with thread Helene had given her. The burn mark remained at the corner. She hadn't tried to remove it. Some damage tells a story, and stories, even painful ones, deserve to be kept. I don't know how to be what he needs, she whispered. You already are. Caelan watched from distances he thought were subtle. They were not. Soren noticed. Helene noticed. The kitchen staff noticed. But Elara, who had spent 19 years being invisible, did not notice the Alpha King standing at the edge of the training field at the exact hour she took Ronan for his afternoon walk, or the way his eyes tracked her across the meadow with an expression that his beta described privately as completely wrecked. He left small things. A warm cloak draped over the chair outside her door when the first spring frost came. Books, histories, novels, a field guide to northern wildflowers, stacked on her windowsill without a note. A pair of boots, lined with fur, set neatly beside her bed while she slept. Elara accepted each gift with the bewildered caution of a stray animal offered food from an open hand, and Caelan accepted her caution with a patience that surprised everyone, including himself. You're courting her, Soren observed one evening. I'm providing for a vulnerable member of my household. You had her favorite tea imported from 3 territories away. She likes chamomile. Chamomile promotes healing. It's a medical decision. Soren stared at him. Caelan stared back. Neither blinked. You're an idiot, Soren said fondly, and left his alpha to his denial. But it was the blanket that undid her. One evening, Elara returned to her room to find it folded on her pillow, not just washed, but repaired. Someone had reinforced the worn patches with new wool, carefully matched in color. The burned corner had been bordered with a thin line of silver stitching, turning the damage into something deliberate, something almost beautiful. She sat on the bed and pressed the blanket to her face, and for the first time since she was 4 years old, she wept. Not the silent, closed-throat crying she had mastered in the cage, but real weeping, ugly and loud, and so full of grief that it spilled out of her like water from a broken vessel. And she could not stop it, and she did not try. In the hallway, Caelan heard her. He stood with his hand raised to knock and did not knock. Instead, he sat on the floor outside her door, his back against the wall, and guarded her sorrow until it passed. The attack came on a Tuesday. Roderick, stripped of his title but not yet imprisoned, a bureaucratic delay that Caelan would blame himself for every day after, had gathered what remained of his loyal wolves and crossed into Blackwood territory under the cover of a moonless night. Their goal was not war. It was pettier than that, and therefore more dangerous. They came for Elara. She was in the garden with Ronan when they breached the eastern wall. The cub, now walking on his healed leg with only a slight limp, had been chasing butterflies while Elara sat in the grass with a book on her lap. The blanket was wrapped around Ronan's shoulders like a cape. His favorite game, the one where he was a wolf knight and she was his kingdom. She smelled them before she heard them. That was the first sign that something had changed inside her, that the flatness Helen had noted in her scent, the absence of wolf, was beginning to shift. Because suddenly, the air was alive with information. Aggression, 5 sources, male, adrenaline sour, and beneath it all, the particular stench of Roderick's rage, as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. "Ronan," she said softly. "Come here." The cub looked up, ears pricked. He could feel it too. They emerged from the tree line like a nightmare returning. 5 wolves, massive, teeth bared, led by Roderick in his alpha form, gray-pelted and scarred, his yellow eyes fixed on Elara with a hatred so concentrated it had its own gravity. She should have been afraid. She had every reason to be afraid. She had 19 years of reasons. But when she looked down at Ronan, who had shifted instinctively, his small black body pressed against her leg, growling with a bravery that broke her heart, the fear did not come. What came instead was something else entirely. It started in her chest, a heat, volcanic and vast, surging upward through her blood, like a river that had been dammed for 19 years and was now, at last, breaking free. Her vision sharpened until she could count the individual hairs on Roderick's muzzle. Her hearing expanded until the forest was an orchestra of information, and deep in the center of her being, in a place she had always believed was empty, something opened its eyes. Not a wolf, or not just a wolf. Something older, rarer, the kind of spirit that appears once in 1,000 generations. Helene would later call it a pure source wolf, a direct descendant of the Moon Mother's original bloodline, so powerful that it could not manifest under conditions of abuse and deprivation. It had been there her entire life, sleeping beneath the trauma like an ember beneath ash, waiting for the one thing that could wake it. Not anger, not survival, love. Elara's shift was not like other wolves' shifts. There was no cracking, no screaming, no grotesque rearrangement of limbs. One moment, she was a small, scarred, trembling girl crouched over a cub in a garden. The next, she was a wolf, white as the moon itself, enormous, radiant with a light that seemed to come from inside her bones. Her eyes were silver. Her presence hit the 5 Ashwood wolves like a physical force, and 3 of them skidded to a halt, whining, unable to advance. Roderick did not stop. His pride was stronger than his instinct, which was exactly the flaw that had poisoned everything he'd ever touched. He lunged. Elara met him midair. The fight lasted 8 seconds. She did not kill him, though she could have. Though the wolf in her screamed for it, though every scar on her human body burned with the memory of how they were made. She pinned him to the earth with her jaws around his throat and held him there, trembling, while the light pouring from her fur illuminated the garden like dawn, and the 3 remaining Ashwood wolves dropped to their bellies in total, terrified submission. That was how Caelan found her. Blazing white, moonlit, magnificent, standing over the broken Alpha who had tried to destroy her, with his son sheltered safely behind her legs. He shifted to human form. He walked toward her slowly, hands open, palms visible. She was shaking, her wolf's eyes wild with the adrenaline of a first shift and the overwhelming sensory assault of a world she was experiencing for the first time in full color. "Elara," he said. Just her name. Nothing else. She looked at him, and the wolf recognized what the woman had been too afraid to see. That this was her mate. That the bond had been forming since the night he'd picked up her blanket from the bloody snow. That the gravity pulling her toward him was not gratitude or dependency, but the ancient, unbreakable thread that the Moon Mother wove between 2 souls designed to orbit each other. She shifted back. She was standing in the garden, barefoot, crying whole. He caught her before she fell. 6 months later, on a morning that smelled of wood smoke and the first frost of autumn, Elara stood at the window of the Alpha King's chambers and watched the sun rise over the Blackwood forest. Ronan was asleep in the nursery that connected to their room, a space she had designed herself, with murals of the moon and forests painted on the walls. He was a year old now, walking with confidence, shifting between forms with the joyful carelessness of a child who had never known cruelty. And if Elara had anything to say about it, never would. He still carried the gray blanket everywhere. It had become his security object, his talisman, his favorite accessory for the Wolf Night game that had expanded to include an elaborate mythology involving a magic castle and a dragon who was suspiciously similar to Soren. Elara smiled. The expression still felt new on her face, like a language she was relearning. Behind her, Caelan stirred. She felt his awareness like a tide coming in. The mate bond was a living thing, a warmth in her chest that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He crossed the room silently and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. "You're thinking loudly," he murmured. "I'm thinking about the ceremony." Today was the day. The formal dissolution of the Ashwood Pack and the absorption of its members into Blackwood territory. Those who passed the Crown's review, which had been thorough, merciless, and fair. Roderick was in a Crown prison, awaiting trial. Celeste had been stripped of her Luna title and banished. Marcus had turned witness in exchange for a reduced sentence, and his testimony had exposed a network of abuse that extended back 2 generations. The wolves who remained, the ones who had been too afraid to act, the ones who had been complicit through silence, were being given a choice. Rehabilitation and reintegration into Blackwood under strict supervision, or exile. Most chose rehabilitation. Fear, Elara had learned, was not the same as evil. Some cages are built from the outside, and the people inside them do not always know they have the key. She had not forgiven them. She was not sure she ever would. But she had decided that forgiveness was not a prerequisite for moving forward, and that healing did not require her to absolve the people who had broken her. It only required her to stop letting the breaking define her. "Are you ready?" Caelan asked. "No," she said honestly, "but I'll do it anyway." He turned her gently to face him. His storm-gray eyes held hers with the steady intensity that had terrified her once, and now felt like home. "You know you don't have to speak. Soren can read the declaration." "I want to speak." She touched the scar on his jaw. A gesture that had become their private language, a way of saying, "I see you, all of you, including the damaged parts." They need to hear it from me. Not the Alpha King's decree, not a political document. They need to hear a voice they tried to silence and know that it survived. He kissed her forehead. "My Luna." The title still made her breath catch, not with fear, but with the staggering improbability of it. The hollow one, the wolfless girl, the creature they'd caged during full moons for entertainment. Now she was the Luna Queen of the largest pack in the Northern Territories, bonded to its king, mother in all but blood to its prince. Her wolf, that radiant, impossible moon-white wolf, ran with the Blackwood Pack on hunt nights, and the other wolves parted for her, not because of her title, but because of her light. She dressed in the white ceremonial robes Helene had made for her. She pinned her mother's blanket, mended, reinforced, the burned corner gleaming with its silver border, across one shoulder like a mantle. Let them see it, she thought. Let them see the damage and the repair. Let them understand that survival is not the absence of scars, but the decision to keep wearing them in the open, where the light can reach them. The ceremony was held in the Blackwood Great Hall. 500 wolves attended. When Elara stepped onto the dais, the silence was so complete she could hear the candle flames breathing. She spoke for 7 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She told them what had been done to her, plainly and without embellishment. And then she told them what she had learned. That cruelty is a choice, that silence is a kind of participation, and that the measure of a pack is not the strength of its alpha, but the safety of its weakest member. When she finished, no one moved. Then Ronan, who had been sitting on Soren's lap in the front row, broke free, toddled to the dais on his small, determined legs, and raised his arms to her. She picked him up. He pressed his face into her neck, and over his dark head, she met Caelan's eyes. He was standing at the edge of the hall, arms crossed, leaning against the wall with the careful nonchalance of a man trying very hard not to let 500 wolves see their king cry. He failed. And in the great hall of the Blackwood Pack, a hollow girl who had once been told she was worth less than the silence between howls stood before the wolves who would become her family, wearing a burned blanket like a crown, holding a child who had chosen her, loved by a king who had found her bleeding in the snow and decided, in the space of a single heartbeat, that she was the answer to a question he hadn't known he'd been asking. The moon rose, the wolves howled, and for the first time in her life, Elara howled with them. Lavender and moonlight. Years later, a visitor to the Blackwood compound would see it. A gray blanket, mended and silver-stitched, folded neatly on the arm of the Luna's throne. Beside the throne, a wolf cub, not so small anymore, would be stretched out in a patch of sunlight, his black fur tipped with silver. And in the garden beyond the hall's windows, a white wolf and a dark one would be running together through the wildflowers, their movements synchronized, their joy so bright it left an afterimage on the air, like the trail of a falling star. The blanket remained, not because it was valuable, but because it was proof. Proof that something broken can be held together, that warmth persists, that the smallest, most damaged object in the world can become sacred if someone loves it enough to stitch it back together and call the scars beautiful. And on clear nights, when the moon was full and the pack gathered to sing, the wolves would say they could hear two voices above all others. The king's, deep and steady as the roots of mountains, and the Luna's, clear, silver, and so achingly beautiful that even the moon leaned closer to listen. Thank you for watching. If Elara's journey moved you, if you felt the weight of that blanket, the crack of that trap, the moment her wolf finally opened its eyes, then you are exactly the kind of soul this story was written for. Hit that like button if you believe the broken deserve to be loved. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. And share this with someone who needs to hear that surviving is enough. But healing is where the real magic begins. Drop a comment. Which moment hit you hardest? We read every single one. See you in the next story.